Hello, folks. My name's Todd Eaton. I'm from the Weather Company, and I'm here to talk about why the Weather Company uses Instana for observability. Give you a little background on myself. I'm head of Watson Advertising and Weather Consumer Product Systems. That's part of the Weather Company, and that team comprises of DevOps, content engineering, and QA teams for the Weather Company consumer-facing products that you all probably use and know very well. Things like weather.com, winterground.com, the Weather Channel mobile apps, and things like that nature. So I also manage the central security team for Watson Advertising and Weather. And we have found that Instana has become a integral part of how we do business in the Weather Company. So I'm going to kind of go over our journey. Talking about when switching to Instana, when we did that, and kind of the background on that. I'll talk about all the pieces that we're using. We use infrastructure monitoring, the application and services monitoring, smart alerts, the real user monitoring RUM, Kubernetes. Talk a little bit about that, and then distributed tracing, and then talk about lessons learned on what we found when we switched over to Instana, and kind of the challenges and some of the things that we're finding with that. All right, switching to Instana. First one's in the pool. It was basically when IBM acquired Instana back at the end of 2020, they were looking around for people to use it. At the time, we were actually looking for a RUM replacement. We were using New Relic for our real user monitoring. So we had a kind of a bake-off going on between various RUM providers. Things like Akamai Impulse, New Relic, of course. We talked with Catchpoint. And we had a couple other ones that we looked at. But it came down to IBM had this a new acquisition, this new tool of Instana. We didn't really look at it at the time, but we said, well, we'll give it a fair shake, and then we'll check it for the other monitoring. So we agreed to be part of the early adopters. Started back in February 2021, and we said, sure, we could do that. I think we agreed upon being an early adopter in the beginning of that month. And then by the 25th, I think it was probably one sprint, maybe 1.5 sprints, where we had our infrastructure reporting. It went pretty fast. To give you some background on where we're at right now, we have probably one of the larger Instana instances or deployments. We have 2 tenants. We use a B2C and a B2B one. That's the 12th largest Instana deployment. And when they look at that, when they talk about that, it's not really talking about our just our basic hosts, which I'll go over when we talk about the infrastructure, but also the telemetry ingest. You're going to see some of the screenshots that I have of our dashboards where you see the amount of traffic that we get coming in and that we're monitoring. And it is a pretty large deployment. So for somebody that just came in, plugged it in, started running it, it's pretty impressive that we're in at least the 12th largest as we go forward. This is kind of the overview view. I just took a screenshot of your basic Instana. This is your top level view of it. As you can see, this is my view. So in my view, I look at RUM data primarily, and you see the numbers there. That's a 10-minute snapshot too. So you'll see the type of numbers that we got for weather.com. We have our iOS flagship that we're using and Wonderground's traffic. And then we take a look at the applications. We got our different applications. You can see the amount of traffic that comes out. So it's pretty easy to see that we're probably one of the 12 largest ones that are out there. So infrastructure and monitoring. Infrastructure was the first thing that we put out, and it gives us a real good view of our landscape. Instana does a pretty good job of it, and they do a good job pretty much out of the box. So the infrastructure agent and sensor installation was relatively easy for us. I remember when we got the instructions on it, I worked with my DevOps team and kind of gave them the documentation for it. Now, in our world, in the consumer products world, we've got a lot of Kubernetes, basically. You see down below on our IKS and our ROCs type of environments. But we also have some VMs that are around, and I was able to handle both and pick up the various infrastructure and applications that we had. With infrastructure, the map view works well, but probably for smaller smaller environments. I'm going to show a picture of our map view, and it was funny. I was helping my neighbor get his. He bought a 75-inch TV, and he was putting it in his backyard area so he could watch ball games from the pool. And I looked at it and said, "Yeah, that's probably the monitor size I need to put my map on there, so it can actually pick out things." But map view works well for smaller environments. The comparison table, which I'm going to show, is probably our primary jumping off page when we're troubleshooting devices and hosts. If you know anything about Instana and the infrastructure view, they have this Entity Explorer. We haven't really used it much, but I find it interesting because it may get us to light about certain environment class and certain infrastructures that may have problems across. Like if we have to apply patching or something, I can see how that Entity Explorer could be valuable in that aspect. But as of right now, we haven't really used it much. The thing about Instana and the infrastructure view is we use it a lot for our troubleshooting. We're able to pull up a pretty decent view of where our problems lie, and then we can drill into it and actually see the issues that are associated with that host or that device or whatever cluster. And then we can immediately go into that and start providing troubleshooting, be it do we offload traffic or do we add additional resources to it, anything that we need for that. So like I said, I'll show you the map view. And this is, I just took a screenshot of our map and I hovered over one of the yellow boxes. As you can tell, our landscape is pretty large. When you talk about the number of clusters that we have, the number of nodes, and the various environments, it can be pretty big to see on this view. That's why we prefer the comparison table. You can sort on those pretty easily. It gives you a pretty decent view. You see over there on the right where you have hosts or devices that are in trouble or giving you alerts. And you can drill into those fairly easily. This is an excellent view where my folks will go in and they'll drill into each one of the problem child areas and be able to figure out what is coming out of these and what kind of issues that we have and how to fix those. So this comparison view is actually an excellent view for that, and something that it's fairly easy to set up. Once you install your agents and your sensors, this stuff comes up relatively easy. I don't think we've done any modifications at all on this, and it's given us a real good view for what we're after. The next big area that we get into is application service monitoring. And that is an important part for us. The infrastructure-wise, we've got a couple of issues with it. We'll get maybe a disk will fill up or something like that. I mean, it's really pretty minimal. The bigger issues that we have is more with our applications. The application service monitoring, that's our primary view for investigating applications or service issues. We have about 50, maybe up to 60 main services. They're containerized services. Call them front end to back end kind of services. And they kind of make sense. So if you know anything about weather.com or Underground, you'll know that we have a today page, right? So we'll have services for the today page, and they break it out by the service name. Here, Daybreak Today is their service name for a particular one. And then we have environment, which is prod, and then our cluster, which in this particular example that I've given is WDC07-1. We had to put those in the charts to kind of explain where those are at and what they're called. But once we had those, we took those services and we rolled them up into applications. And then they, like services go up. So then we can see specifically if we're having a problem with a release that goes across multiple clusters for a particular service. So in here we have web Daybreak Today would be the application that the Daybreak Today prod WDC07-1 rolls up into. We found that to be probably the easiest way of figuring out our applications and our services and how to roll them up properly. The thing about that is when we get into that view, I put a note in there and down there at the last one, you can sort pretty easily on where you're on different things, like the name of it or your latency or your error rate or things like that. We were using New Relic before, and New Relic made a change in their dashboard where they kind of got rid of that. I think you actually had to create your own individual dashboard that you could be able to sort on and things like that. And I remember that because it was one of the things that during the transition, we were going off of New Relic into Instana, and we found that when that instant sort again came back, it was like, all right, this is almost the price of admission to get back into Instana. It helped us out quite a bit on figuring out where our problems were lying. So here's a view of our applications. This is the application view. Services, you would have different services that roll up underneath those. We have much more services, but it gives you pretty much the information that you need right away. You're talking about your latency. You're talking about your error rate. You can sort on the error rate and get your highest level, and you can find out if you got a problem or not. And they also have health checks out there, so you can see, hey, is it you're getting alerts or having anything problem with your application. After we set up the infrastructure piece first, got that rolling, got some great telemetry out of that, and got some great metrics, and then set up our applications, and then we had to set up the smart alerts and the alerting. And I make a joke kind of here because the smart alerts sometimes are a little too smart for us. They're somewhat can be fine-grained. That's something you got to watch out for as you're going through these. The setting up the alerts wasn't too hard. I was talking to my folks about it because this happened last year, and I was like, well, you remember, how long did it set up to do smart alerts? And my team looked at it, told me, he said, you set them up. So that ought to tell you that if it got the manager setting up the smart alerts, it's actually a pretty easy thing to do. Integration with Slack and PagerDuty was pretty seamless. We do have it going to Slack. I'll show an example of what that looks like and kind of explain what I mean about it being a little too smart. The smart alerts are using an AI that Instana has, and it's actually fine-tuning it as it goes along. We have noticed that, now that we've had it for over a year, it does, it will know, like, what's your normal rate. So a big thing on the one I'll show you is the latency time. And it's got it down to a pretty rough number, or not a rough number, but a pretty defined number where it says, yeah, your app is usually living below this line most of the time. I don't think we really set it up as a specific number, but it is fine-tuned it, and it knows when it starts bouncing above that line. Configuration options, there's various configuration options that you can do for this. They have sensitivity configuration options for your alerts. They have the number of events that happen over time. They have if you've got the events you got different options that you can set on that, and that was pretty cool. I liked how they set that up and how it gave me the options to play around with that. So here's the output of a smart alert in this one. I think this is Discal. And it gives you enough info. I mean, it tells you where you're at. And this just happened to be, at the time when I was preparing for this, I didn't have many. I had a couple of alerts, but not really that much. And luckily for our environments, we have that. We've seen it in other areas. I mean, if we have a big storm come through and we're not properly auto-scaling or things like that, we'll get a lot more alerts. But for the most part, the alerts that come up are actionable. They give you enough information that you need to deal with. And it's something that we can go through and find out the information that we need to fix the problem. I talked about the alert setup. This is part of that we were talking about, right? The different options. And here you see the where we've got our persistence over time. You can do the number of events that happen over time. That was a pretty good one. I played around with that. And the thing with the alerts is setting them up, getting a feel for what's going on with these, and then tweaking them as you go along. It wasn't that much noise. I mean, in the beginning, there was a little bit of noise, and we had to do some tweaking. But as I was reviewing for this, I actually found one that I could tweak as well. So it seemed pretty good, and it's pretty easy to do. And they have some interesting controls that you can play around with to fine-tune your alerts. And then this is what they look like on Slack. And you see on that bottom one, calls are slower equal to 13 milliseconds based on latency. Yeah, that was the one that, I popped up and I said, ooh, that's pretty tight, 13 milliseconds. I mean, some apps, if I talk to my API guys, 13 milliseconds is a long time for them. On this particular service that we had, that WA prod service, 13 milliseconds, I can kind of live with it. So I would, use these, and I go back in and I kind of adjust as we go along. Real user monitoring. This was interesting. We're actually probably being one of the 12th largest one deployment. I think this one helped. We have a lot in the application space, a lot of traffic and a lot of hosts. But when we added RUM to it got, I bet you it got a lot of more input, because RUM, it's a pretty decent RUM tool from a web standpoint. Like I said, we were going through that RUM evaluation, replacement evaluation. Can I stand up here and say, hey, it's better than New Relic or Impulse or Catchpoint? I don't know. I mean, each of them have their different flavors. They have different views. They have different remediation recommendations and stuff. But for what we use and the number of people that we had, Instana's RUM is actually quite well. Worked quite well for us. It is a decent solution, especially if you're looking for your basic stuff and you want to know, hey, how's my app? Where are the people that are hitting it? What kind of performance do they have from it? Am I seeing any drastic increase in load times or contentful pain and things like that we're looking for? It took us a while to get RUM up, but not because of Instana's, not because of an Instana limitation. This had more to do with the development dependencies and just competing priorities that we had. Right now, we monitor our websites, an iOS flagship app, and it's interesting, right out of the box, it picked up not only the basic metrics that you would expect, your load times and things like that. It picked up a bunch of custom metrics that we put in. Our ad times, our ad load times are big for us. Ad start, and things like that. And we put little hooks in there for when impressions show up and things like that. So it picked them all up, and it was pretty interesting to see that right out of the box. Here's a view of it. Gives you pretty decent data. That top JS errors, that's always interesting, and we bring that up as we go through. But we watch this continually, and we keep an eye on it. You see at the end there, like the last minute, it's like a minute and a half or whatever. You see that slope going down. It's just catching up. It's not really, sometimes it scares you if you don't know it and you're not looking for it, but it's pretty easy to look at. And then this is always a good view. You got, you can see where your traffic is coming from. Here I highlighted New York State, right? It happened to be one of the big ones at that time. And it'll show you how much traffic is coming from a particular area. That's always a good view that people like to see, and see that in a talk or whatever. All right, for Kubernetes, the Kubernetes features, I put in there, I'm not sure why it's not used more. It's actually a really decent view. It gives you a number of clusters, nodes, and pods that you have. You can drill into it. It really gives a lot of the information we had before we had Instana with our Prometheus and our Grafana views. But for whatever reason, I don't know why our DevOps team just doesn't gravitate to this. They tend to use Prometheus and Grafana more. But I enjoy it. I think it's a real good view. It tells me a lot of information. Could use a sum feature on that, where I get asked every now and again, hey, how many pods do you have? And I got to sit there and count up the different pods from the different nodes or the different clusters. But I like it. I think it's a pretty decent view, and it shows you kind of the differences. I like how it picked up. I can see my IKS versus my rocks clusters in here, or my and tells me everything I really need to know from an overview, and then I can drill into it and actually get a lot more out of it. Distributed tracing, that's the last thing that we put in, and this was interesting because it tells distributed tracing what your services touch and where everything is at. That was the last feature that we installed. Once again, not because of Instana. It was developing dependencies. It actually had to be put into the code to get that picked up. But once we put it in, it surprisingly gave us some great information right off the bat. You can see where your traffic is going. You can see which services are consuming it. Interestingly enough, we have services that cross clusters or talk to services cross cluster, and you can see it in here. So if we ever have communication problems across regions or across clusters, we can pick them up pretty quick in this. And it gave us a real good view of our dependencies. So I put a note in there, before we did this, we were able to, we kind of able to troubleshoot where we're at a bit just from log files and things like that. But this gave us a better view of it, and we're able to pick it up sooner rather than later of when we're having a problem. So here's a view of it. This is always good. And it's got those little dots. Those dots float. You'll see them as they go through, and you see, some services have a whole bunch that go off into one service, and then some have minimal. But as you can tell in this one, this particular service view, it stretches out. So one of our services is talking to other services, and you see how those list out. So you can get a good view. If you have distributive tracing turned on for your whole ecosystem or whatever it is, then you can see kind of a view of, hey, where's all this traffic coming from? If I'm hitting this thing, where is everything going? And do I have any bottlenecks or any issues in any of the areas that I see? So real good. I mean, really enjoyed that one. So in conclusion, got some lesson learned from this that we found. First thing I got to say is the agent and the sensor installation was not difficult. It's pretty easy to put in, get it started up, and get your telemetry going right out of the gate. It shouldn't be intimidated at all by anything of that nature. It provides a lot of metrics out of the box. One thing, I showed a little bit of infrastructure and the services. The one that surprised us the most was we have some PHP stuff, and it pulled that out right away. So they have just so many languages and so many different types of sensors that can pull up that once you put it in, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see this pretty easily, and gets you right away so you can start seeing stuff. One thing, a note of caution, watch your use. We're the 12th largest deployment of it. We've had some, previously we had some challenges on the sizing. We kind of had to break stuff out. I told you we had 2 tenants. At one point we had 1 tenant, and we were just kind of overloading it a little bit. So you got to be careful with that. Make sure you break out your tenants. You might need different tenants and accounts and things like that. But just to make sure you're sized properly and you don't overrun the back end for that. Review your metrics and output before setting up alerting. That was important for us. So we actually let it run. We let Instana run, the infrastructure monitoring, application monitoring. We let it run for a little bit just so we could see what was going on. And then we'd go in and kind of set up alerts and see how they would act, and see if you got different views of, past 24 hours, past 7 days, and you can see how many alerts would pop up. And you want to do that to make sure that you're setting up your alerting properly. The smart alerts, it may take some tweaks, and that's fine. I mean, it's AI. It's just like any other AI. You got to train it, and you got to, massage it a bit, make sure that it's running well. So, but just be prepared for that. When you're migrating, the thing that we had to press upon with our management is, there are some long tails. It's going to take a little while for us to get, if you have dependencies with development, with some of the other teams, need to plan for that accordingly. A lot of times when I come in there and say, yeah, it's really easy to install the agents and sensors, sometimes management thinks, okay, now you're done. It's like, I got some work to do. I got cleanup. I got fine tuning, things like that. Make sure they plan for that. And then don't be afraid to enable features and let them organically grow. That's the Kubernetes piece for us. We enable that. We're letting it grow. I got some adoption. I mean, we revisit it and we talk with the teams and stuff. And sometimes people look at it, and they'll adopt it later on. But don't be afraid of that. Just fire things up and let them go and see if they're going to fit for you as you go. All right. So those are the things that we learned from this our Instana implementation. Thank you for your time. I believe I don't see any questions or anything out there. So if you got any questions, if you want to post them in the channel or whatever. Otherwise, I'm on Slack. I'm in the weather company while I'm on IBM Slack. So if you got any questions or anything, and had anything that comes up afterwards, feel free, reach out to me. I talk to a lot of people, a lot of different folks, and don't mind talking about how our use of it. And, if you want a deep dive or anything, we can talk about, or I can get you in touch with some of my folks that did the installations and that use it on day-to-day piece of it to do troubleshooting. And, we can go over some stuff for you. All right, folks, thank you for your time. And I hope you have a good day. Bye now.